Welcome to the Border Chronicle Weekly Roundup, where we highlight the stories featured this week in the Border Chronicle and across the region. And I'll be publishing this full roundup right after today's video. And Caroline Tracy has very kindly joined us today, where there's a lot going on, let's just say. But this week, the Border Chronicle has been focusing on endangered rivers, which is an incredibly important topic for the U.S.-Mexico border region because two of North America's most endangered rivers, the Rio Grande and the Tijuana River, are in the U.S.-Mexico border region. So, and Caroline has actually written about both of them. You did a piece about the Tijuana River last month. But this week,
After, the Santa Cruz, I believe, here in Arizona, Arizona and Sonora has been previously on the most endangered rivers list. It's a list that comes out yearly. So both the Santa Cruz and the San Pedro here are, I think, also kind of candidates for the list.
yeah. So then that makes, we have many endangered rivers in the region. And so we, at the Border Chronicle want to keep the spotlight on this issue, right? Because without water, nothing exists. So it's incredibly important. And this week, Caroline, you had a really interesting piece on Mexican photographer Eunice Adorno, who did a photo series called Las Aguas Eran Salvajes, The Waters Were Wild, on Mexico's 20th century development of dams. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that. How did you discover her work?
Absolutely. Eunice is an artist and also works as a photojournalist. Her work really kind of spans both disciplines and combines them, I think, in really unique and interesting ways. I guess I found out about her work both through the art and journalism worlds in Mexico, and I was really drawn to this project called The Waters Were Wild, or Las Aguas Eran Salvajes, which started in Mexico City with the water infrastructure there that is used to drain the valley, or rather the basin that the city sits in. She started photographing the different, the drainage tunnels, which are massive, and the other infrastructure there, and then also began photographing in the southern part of the country in Oaxaca, Chiapas, and eventually made her way to this area of Sonora that we've covered in the Border Chronicle previously with the essay called Telling the Stories of Sonora's Water that we published by Diego Rodriguez Landeros a few months ago. And in the region where she photographed in Sonora, there are now buildings that are being exposed that were previously covered by a dam. And so you can kind of see the traces of the lives that were lost to the dam construction. So she photographs both those exposed buildings and also the kind of decaying dam infrastructure to, I think, send a message about the ideology that kind of that built these dams in the 20th century is kind of becoming exhausted and obsolete now, and we need to be thinking about water in a different way.
And your father-in-law had a great quote that sort of summed up the 20th century optimism about building all these dams. I wonder if you could repeat it.
Yeah, my father-in-law was kind of the opposite ideology. The exhausted definitely represented the exhausted ideology. He said that in Mexico we still need another 13 kick-ass dams.
Right. Like keep building those dams. I mean, so the lead photo from her series on The Waters Were Wild is the dam in Hermosillo, the Abelardo Rodriguez Dam, and that's really something else. I mean, it's at zero capacity, right? I mean, there is no water.
It's a complicated story. That actually we also covered a little bit in the article about the proposed dams in Sonora from July. If anyone who's listening is interested to learn more, I think that that gives a little bit of an overview. But essentially, that dam is right next to the city of Hermosillo. It's like it's very unusual to have a dam just right on top of the city in the way that it is. And so, I believe in the early 1990s, a second dam was constructed slightly upstream, and the idea was that it would be additional water capacity. But the fact was that there wasn't enough water to fill both dams. And so the downstream dam, which is right next to the city, has just been sitting empty for years, essentially.
Yeah, and it really does look like this ancient relic from the past, sort of dystopian looking, right? Because this dam is sort of starting to crumble and, is, of course, full of just, like, parched earth.
Yeah, it's
Um,
amazing to see. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Is she going to continue working on water-themed and development-themed issues?
My understanding from talking with her is that this series is not completed. That eventually there'll be a book, and
Oh,
it'll be
great.
exhibited more completely. Yeah.
Yeah, so for people who haven't seen this piece yet, Caroline wrote this really wonderful, article about Mexican photographer Eunice Adorno and looking at Mexico's 20th century dam constructions and climate change and drought and just how it's pretty clear that we need to entirely reconfigure our thinking about water and water conservation. Um and development. I apparently we have a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean, they're hard questions to resolve for sure.
Hey, but we do have some good news. So Pablo de la Rosa in South Texas did a positive story on Thursday about water, which is great. Um, he did a piece on a new fund called the Water Resiliency Fund that was created by the binational North American Development Bank, or known as NAD Bank, which is funded by the US and Mexico. And for folks who don't know much about NAD Bank, it was created alongside the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement to finance projects on the border, including energy, waste management, air quality, and water infrastructure. So the new fund is for $400 million. And it's a combination of low interest loans and grants that are available for irrigation district managers, cities, NGOs, and other border entities um, to work on projects to conserve water. And of course, 400 million, it's a great start, but it's a drop a drop in the bucket, so to say. um, because billions are needed to just, reconfigure the infrastructure at the border to conserve water. And Pablo talked to Martin Castro, who's the director of watershed science at the Rio Grande International Study Center in Laredo. Have you ever spoken with him before,
I
Caroline?
haven't spoken with him, but I've spoken with other people from that organization. I think it's a really neat organization.
It's a great organization, and Martin he was a water master on the Rio Grande, and he's just super, super knowledgeable. Uh, oh, Pablo Andro got confused. He thought we were talking about you. Well, yes, Pablo, you're great too. But this is Pablo, another Pablo, Pablo de la Rosa, our correspondent in South Texas. And of course, so Martin said, this is amazing, but we need, billions more. Um, and Martin's organization, the Rio Grande International Study Center in Laredo, is doing a really interesting project with NAD Bank, where they are finding ways to reclaim and reuse Laredo's wastewater, because they did a study where they found that Laredo would run out of water by 2044 if they just go along as is. And I mean the rate things are going, gosh, it could be even sooner than that, right? With climate change and just the extreme drought that we're seeing
And
at
it's
the border.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
New
Um,
extractive developments in the region. I mean, across the country, but in this region.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then separately in August, the IBWC announced 400 million to clean up the Tijuana River, and you did a great Q&A in July about that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that real quick?
Briefly, yeah, I did an interview with Marco Samaniego, who's a professor at the University of Baja California and is a historian of the U.S.-Mexico border. But we spoke about the Tijuana River and the significance of this particular agreement. I think that the impression I got from him is that the current agreements that are happening are good. There's nothing bad about them, but they're not necessarily monumental.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, I'm saying this is good news because, something's happening, thank God. But it's yeah, we need to a lot more needs to happen. Also, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum announced that Mexico was pledging 388 million to irrigation districts supplied by the lower Rio Grande and one of its tributaries, the San Juan River, across the states of Nuevo Leon and Tamaulipas. So that's good news. Um, so, um,
Yeah,
so Mexico is also stepping
National
up.
Hydraulic Plan definitely has a lot of focus on the country's north and trying to um, increase the amount of technology that farmers have access to, partially with an eye to water conservation.
Right, right. Somebody just posted a question, but I cannot
I
read
think I
it.
saw it. I think it has to do with the balance of climate change, drought, and infrastructure and management. How those three things affect the water situation, water crisis, and it's unfortunately not a clear answer. But I think that one thing that people tend to say is climate change is a threat multiplier. So we have this issue that of over extraction, and then now climate change is exacerbating it. So even if we were living in a world without climate change, we would be facing water shortage issues because of over extraction and drought cycles. But climate change is essentially making all of these things worse very fast. I guess is sort of the easy answer that they're both factors. And I think that in terms of management and resolution, uh, really it should be important to be thinking about decreasing water use. And I guess with uh, things like data centers, that's just not the trend, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the data centers because that's something you're working on right now. And of course, we're seeing like this wave of data centers being proposed, throughout the border region, in this really, really dry, arid climate, right? Where we're already facing water shortages. And, these data centers are coming in. Of course, we've had this very controversial one uh, being discussed here in Tucson. There's one in Doña Ana County. I believe San Diego's got quite a few already. And you said
All
and
over, yeah.
all over.
The Great Lakes region is worrying about data centers, places that seem flush with water. It's just this really kind of like shocking and insatiable development of the past couple of years that these are just springing up everywhere. And I think it's a big challenge for communities to try and plan for their water futures that were already kind of imperiled. And now to have these really big water users on top of it is challenging.
Yeah, the whole AI and data center thing seems like this very overheated, like, economic bubble, right? Where they're just pushing, pushing, pushing these projects, and it feels like we don't have the time or space to discuss, what are we gonna get from this? What does it really mean for our communities? Anyway, I'm looking forward to reading your piece that's going to be coming out on this, Caroline, and I know you're getting into, desalinization
Yeah.
as well, which is another big thing, right?
Yeah, it's one of the major water sources that's on the table for especially for the Southwest right now is this kind of desalination of both ocean sources or Gulf sources, and also the briny groundwater layers. So that's something that you'll be able to read about in the Border Chronicle relatively soon.
Yeah, cool. And I just wanted to mention one other, big story that's come across the pipeline that, we that I wanted to mention, it'll be in the roundup, is that, Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, and the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, met, to talk about trade, including tariffs, and the United States Canada Mexico Free Trade Agreement, which is coming up for renegotiation next year, which is like right around the corner. And of course, there's been a free trade agreement in place since 1994. And so they're going to be renegotiating it. And, with Trump's tariffs and all this uncertainty and everything, we see Mexico and Canada sort of getting closer. It appears to be getting closer as we, approach the renegotiation. And there's already some meetings going on. And in the spring, I spoke with Jerry Pacheco, who's the president of the Border Industrial Association in Santa Teresa, Mexico. Or Santa Teresa, New Mexico, and and um, he's decades in border trade, and he said he's real concerned about this renegotiation of the trade agreement because he's afraid that Trump's going to bring in like fentanyl. He's going to bring in the water treaties. He's going to bring in a lot of things that don't have much to do with trade. That's really going to inject a lot of like heat and uncertainty into the renegotiation. And he said that Mexico has the most trade agreements of any country in the world. I didn't realize that.
That is very
And
interesting, yeah.
yeah, and it's very dependent on foreign trade, and Mexico's really trying to avoid going into recession because of these tariffs. So it's interesting to see Mexico and Canada appearing to get closer, and come up with some of their own agreements, right, without like igniting Trump's
Yeah.
rage.
Yeah, Mexico, I recently saw a chart showing that, since the 2008 recession, Mexico basically has had kind of consistent growth in trade and is kind of a prime example of the way that global trade reshifted, that US China trade stopped being quite so important, and trade between other countries became increasing, started to have kind of an increasing share of global trade. But I think it's still true that trade with the US is something like 30% of Mexico's GDP. Like, it just
Yeah.
would be devastating to lose that trade, and I think it would be very challenging for the US to make up for it too. So, I wonder, if Mexico and Canada are thinking about what points of leverage they might have if they come together, or yeah, what are their points of leverage against the US?
Yeah, and as a binational family, of course, we're always watching the US peso conversion, and the peso is very strong right now, stronger than it's been in a long time, compared to the dollar. The dollar is getting weaker. Um, so, yeah, I mean, this affects us all in the border, right? Especially if you have family in Mexico, um, with the economy, like the Mexican economy matters a lot, uh, to the US and vice versa, of course, and yeah. And greetings in Peru. We have somebody, Alberto watching from Peru, so, um, thanks for tuning in to the Border Chronicle, and well, great. Well, thank you so much, Caroline, and, stay tuned, folks. I'll be posting the roundup, right after this with some links to important border stories from across the region and our own stories, which we, highlighted today during the live video. So, have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks. Bye.